the latest in our series of foreign exchange debates. And we thought what we'd do today maybe is try to focus on two issues. So I'll lead. And here we are a few days after the Paris climate change agreement was signed. I think there are a lot of things, a lot is written in the press, but maybe a couple things that I'd at least like to make an observation on and throw your way. I mean, one, I think, is that we don't know whether this is going to be a big dent in the problem, but it's probably the best chance we've had, globally. And I think it's one in which the leadership for it, I think it was a priority for President Obama. He'd been criticized by a number of people, yourself included, in his first term for not making progress on climate change. Of course, partly that was because the Republicans had filibustered the bill in the Senate in 2010. But this wasn't just an American deal. The French played a huge role. The UN provided sort of the sponsorship. And what was interesting was countries came together now, not just sort of rejecting, the international community's telling me what I got to do, but feeling the domestic heat, as it were, right? China in the middle of this had the smog alert and shut down Beijing basically for 2 days. The cost curves are starting to change, so you can have good economics and good green. And I think it was a good sign. I also think for U.S.-China relations, the way it showed we could work together on this, even though we have a whole lot of other differences, that may be a more useful model going forward for U.S.-China relations than either the sort of strict containment or strict engagement. But there are a lot of other aspects of it, too.
Well, it was a historic achievement for the White House. This is something that they've pursued for a long time. I think they were frustrated with the lack of progress in the first term. And President Obama made it a high priority in his second term, and they are understandably pleased that they secured this deal before their clock ran out. Now, whether this deal will be the game changer that the president has described it to be, that will depend on how much it's followed, the implementation is followed. In order to get it around the treaty ratification process in the U.S., they had to make the carbon limits and the hard targets had to be voluntary.
Right. I mean, other countries wanted that too, I think.
Right. Yeah. But of course, this has been the problem with international efforts on climate change for a long time. You had a few wealthy countries who were where the domestic politics were such that they were willing to pay that price, but then you had the large carbon emitters where the domestic politics were not encouraging them to restrict, and they would make voluntary targets and not meet them. And so, or that when they meet them, it was only because of economic slowdown. So the challenge going forward will be, will the commitments that were made in Paris be honored, not just by the administrations that made the commitments, but by successive administrations, and that's going to be hard to see. You're right that this that China and the U.S. were able to overcome some differences in these terms. India was a more difficult negotiating partner this time. But what you saw between U.S. and China, probably building on the deal that the U.S. and China bilaterally struck last year, is something that the administration has been trying to pursue since the first year of their term, right? Is cooperative relations with the two largest economies working together to solve global problems. Whether that will stick and whether that will survive other challenges to the relationship, we'll have to see.
No, it's going to be a mixed relationship for sure, But I think the other thing that came through is, so the domestic politics are changing, and they're starting to change in India too. The economics are really changing, right? When you have large pools, $1 billion of investment funds in New York on Wall Street that are investing in green, and they're both doing good and doing well. You have this coalition that Bill Gates put together that I'm sure is going to have some tough criteria about where they're prepared to put their money. So the economics are changing, as well as the politics are changing. I mean, even in this country, I think you don't see it as much in the Republican Party, where people are still doing this denialism of the science, as if there's been anything we've ever done in history that had 99.9% scientific, validation. I mean, we went after strategic defense initiative in the 1980s when the science was maybe 40 or 60%. So it's kind of a false criteria. But I think that if you look at the polls, people kind of get it. Conservatives see it to a great extent in terms of, their own sense of the environment. they're suspicious of some policies, but as we get some running room and show that it's a win-win, I think we'll begin to see some momentum to build on Paris. Paris won't be enough in itself.
Well, and it will take that. So you're right that within the Republican Party, there's two debates. There's a debate about the science, and we can set that aside. But there's also...
Wish we could, by the
way. For our purposes, we'll set that aside. In the second debate, though, is a debate about the economics. Yeah. And do the cures that are being offered make economic sense, and do they offer a prospect of making enough of a change in the underlying conditions for climate change to be worth the cost? And I think many Republicans reached the conclusion that many Democrats did, which is that up until now, the costs have been too great for the policy proposals. But you're right that one of the interesting changes in the last several years has been this effort to change the market conditions. And if those efforts are successful and you're able to harness market forces behind climate change, well, that would be a very Republican solution to it, and I think you would see Republicans joining it. So let me move on to the other issue, because that was the part of the week that the White House probably celebrated, was the Paris achievement. Right. They probably celebrated less enthusiastically the other dramatic event of the week, which was the president going before the American people for a primetime Oval Office address. This is the big gun of the bully pulpit for the president. This is his biggest rhetorical weapon, to go directly to the American people on TV in prime time, interrupting Sunday night TV, to give a message about the war on terror in the wake of the San Bernardino terrorist attacks. That primetime Oval Office address was not well received, certainly not by Republicans, but my sense is not by Democrats either, and I'd be curious what you thought of it.
No, I think it was. I think I agree with your general assessment. I think that, on the one hand, there's a real risk, and there is some overreacting to terrorism in this country. Some of it's fed by some of the crazy ideas out on the campaign trail. But the reality is, terrorism is sort of Shakespearean, right? All the world's a stage, and the drama of it and the fear captures people. There are all sorts of statistics about why the risks from terrorism are a lot less than any number of things. But when you throw in psychology and social psychology and politics, the reality is the reality. And I still think the president needs to meet people where they are and say, Bill Clinton used to say, I share your pain. I see your anxiety. Let me explain to you where I think we need to go. He hasn't really done that. The other piece of it to me, and I think that if you put Paris, the bombing in Beirut, the bombing in Ankara, and San Bernardino, all of which are attributable to ISIS together, you do really have a watershed moment, which you could say, whatever you think about policy in the past, here's where we're going. But it really takes you to Syria, because if it wasn't for Syria, ISIS would not be of the same magnitude. You really need the ungoverned spaces that they've had. They have a little bit in Iraq. And my biggest issue that I have differed with the administration on, administration that I've supported, overall, has been Syria. And I still don't think we're there on understanding what it's really going to take to make a dent in the Syria problem.
I think you're right, and certainly Democrats have expressed concern that the president's Syria strategy is inadequate. Democrats and/or former national security experts who worked for President Obama. But I also think that you're hearing from the Democrats, by what they say and what they don't say, that they feel the president's losing his connection to the American people on this issue. So every time a president gives a big speech like that, the White House Communications Office will flood sympathetic Democrats with talking points, encouraging them to retweet and go on TV and so forth, echoing the president's points. I'm sure they tried that again this time, but very few Democrats did it. And the silence from the Clinton campaign, I thought, was telling. Yep. She did not endorse what the president said. Of course, she didn't criticize it either, right. But you get the sense that the Democrats feel like the president's being maladroit on this issue.
I think that's a fair criticism. I think there's space. I don't think you have people at right angles where many Democrats or Hillary Clinton are fundamentally separating themselves, as in I disagree, a la 1968, Gene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy with Lyndon Johnson, the Vietnam War, a la what some Republicans did with George W. Bush over Iraq. So there's space there. And I think their sense, and coming from Hillary Clinton, is it's not that, we need to do more and better, and as opposed to everything he's doing is wrong. So politically, we'll see where it goes. But that's the difference there. I don't think Democrats are feeling like it's an albatross, I just don't think they're really prepared to say it's enough, both in tone and content.
Well, the president clearly was struggling to find a way of talking about the problem without making the problem worse, without fueling Islamophobia or the bashing of Muslims. Of course, there's been unfortunate rhetoric on the Republican campaign side that fueled it. But it's also clear that the president hasn't found the sweet spot on the message. I'd encourage you to take a look at a speech by the junior senator from Nebraska. His name is Ben Sass. And he gave a short speech from San Bernardino and then a longer one on the floor of the Senate. And I think he threaded the needle. I think he gave the message that President Obama could have given it. It wasn't really a partisan message, but it I think, hit the points that the president needs to make about the nature of the threat and the nature of our response and who we are as Americans and how we should respond to that. President Obama was trying to do that. I don't think he succeeded. Well, but watch it and we'll
I will.
talk
I mean,
about
we
it
could
next
benefit
time.
from anybody that helps thread that needle, because I think as a country we're going to keep facing this, and how we both deal with it assertively and develop our own resilience, because this age of the, whatever you want to call it, the lone wolf or the super empowered individual, it's going to be with us for a long time. And we need to deal with ISIS, but after ISIS there'll be another, and it'll keep going on. So,
well, keep going on is what this foreign exchange
we'll
is
do it
going to
again.
be, and we'll do it again. And we'll
maybe
see.
after the New Year. Happy New
I
Year.
like that. Happy
All
New Year to you.
All right.
Take care.